Mark, welcome to Stories in AI. How are
Hey,
you? Good
good
to
to see
see you
you.
too. Good to be together again, virtually though. And although we both live in Austin,
Yeah,
it's been a
yeah,
while since we caught up in person.
yeah. There's a lot of people I've been talking to over the year, but I haven't actually seen in person, and that's just such a weird feeling.
Now, I think, once we
But
start meeting people in person, it'll probably start getting a little weird because it's getting that 18-month mark where habits set in. Anyways,
yeah,
so again,
yeah.
thanks again for doing this and thanks for jumping on the show. Why don't we start with your personal story? Tell us about your story, your journey, and then we'll go into a lot more details.
Oh man. So I've been a designer since about professionally since '92. I dropped out of University of Texas studying fine art um, to really start professionally working because there was such a demand for what I wanted to do. Um, I just wasn't making it to classes. So that's a good place to start. I was a programmer as a kid, so I came into the design field with, I think, an innate understanding of technical ideas and, you know, what it means to think about software and to think about making software more interesting to people, which is essentially what my job is. Um, I started a little design company, failed spectacularly, but luckily, Frog Design bought it up just in the interest in getting myself and a few of my employees. That was with Colin Cole. If you
I
know
do.
Colin, he and I worked together for a very long time. He and I essentially founded Frog Design's first digital capability. So that was 1994, so really early in the software field. And that's worth sharing simply because I think it gave me a fantastic opportunity to grow with the field and essentially to experience a lot of firsts. And AI now, of course, my latest fascination, and it's also keeping me busy, keeping Argo busy. Um, it's another first. Anyway, I worked at Frog Design for 20 years, 94 to the end of 2013, and then left to essentially found my own company, Argo Design, and that's what I'm doing now. And I know you from working with
That's
Cognitive
right.
Scale, who also started right in 2014. It's funny, they were the first client I sat down with.
Wow.
I didn't have a studio, I didn't have much of a team, and we met in a coffee shop. And Manoj, of course, in his self, was super excited about here's what's going on, here's what we're going to do. And, uh, it was like, great, I'd love to help. Um, and so we've been helping them from day one, and that has been a great kind of roadmap for us in learning about and contributing to the subject of AI as designers. And yeah, so
That's that's
and
awesome.
that's why I got invited, I guess, to talk to
No,
you.
this has been
Besides the fact,
fascinating. I still remember, I think the project that we worked on that I very clearly remember is the Cortex Studio, right? When we launched that, there was a Fast Company
yep,
article that came out saying the world's first graphical AI interface, if you will, right? So to how do you really connect
yeah,
the human actor to building AI systems without subject matter expertise? That was a beautiful product, and it still is a beautiful product. I was talking to Shay the other day.
yeah, we just helped develop the next gen of that. So that was Cortex 5 that you
Yep.
remember, and Cortex 6 is now just coming out on the market, and there's been some press about it in the last several
Yep.
weeks. So
That's exciting.
it's cool to get to work on your own product, right? You do a generation of a product and you realize all the things that you left on the table or that you'd like to fix, and it's great to do another rev.
Yeah.
Um,
And Mark,
yeah, really, really
no,
proud of
it's
that.
it's pretty amazing. And so you've done a lot of other work since that and doing a lot of stuff. So and you've been in the intersection of technology and humanities, if you will, for a long time, right? And what about
Yeah,
AI
yeah.
excites you? What is it about AI?
Well, all of computer software is a situation where you have um, information people would normally employ either just mentally, they would remember it, or they would have to deal with it in paper. And obviously software gives us an immense access to that information, but also the ability to cull and sort and filter in really creative ways that brings information into the context of why you might want it, right? I'm looking for a pair of shoes. Without a computer, it's like, here's 10 shoes. Which one do you want? And with one, you end up with a shopping situation like Amazon. It's like, here's 100,000 shoes. Which one do you want? And so when we look at the kind of modern context of computing, you realize like most of that is just presenting people lists and doing some kind of brute force reduction or forcing the user to sift through that content and make sense of it. We do a lot of this, right? Every day we sit in front of a machine looking at the screens, or we hold it in our hands and we try and make sense of these loads and loads of information. Well, AI, first and foremost, does an amazing job of picking the content for us based on some context and trying to make sense of it. And picking content sometimes is like with a camera looking at the world, which is content, right? And deciding there's an interesting object moving. And so we have now cameras that can say, oh, there's somebody at your door. That's AI in obviously making recommendations for us in shopping or in professional situations, like what treatment should I give this patient? That's sorting through massive lists, right? Doctors normally having to do that themselves or just choosing to go with the most obvious answer. Now have AI helping them sort through that information, make sense of it, and help reduce the number of choices. And that still requires an interface. It's not reducing the choice down to one, which may one day be the case, which will, in a lot of ways, reduce the need for an interface, or we could call that the ultimate interface.
Yeah.
Here's your choice. Here's what you should do. But it reduces choice and it creates new interface problems. For example, like, why did you reduce the multitude of shoes I might want down to these few shoes, or the multitude of treatment protocols for this patient down to these few? What are you, looking into the AI and asking it, what is your reasoning? That is still an interface problem. And I guess maybe I've skewed off your question, but that's what's so interesting about it. And that's why design and technology is so interesting, and particularly AI.
That's fascinating. And in fact, it's so counterintuitive. You think about choices improving, as one way, optionality and choices is supposed to improve the human condition, but it's actually the reduction of choices,
tyranny of
right?
Choice.
Yeah, the tyranny of choice, right? But reducing those choices is what really improves the human experience at the end of the day. Give me some examples of some exciting projects you're on right now in AI.
Well, AI comes in several different flavors. So there are customers who are employing it, and that changes the nature of how their customer, the end user, engages their product because they've used AI. And so we have a job then, like I was describing, the sort of presentation of information, the nature of that changes. It's no longer such a manual task. You have many more tools for filtering and finding what it is you're looking for, or the system's automatically recommending things for you, even when you don't necessarily ask. And that changes the interface. We have clients who are asking for things like that. And that comes in the form more literally like web pages that are presenting content based on your browsing history. So the web page used to be, it's funny, the biggest challenge we had with a home page for a major manufacturer was often all the business divisions and the product groups were vying for attention on the home page. So it would be a political fight for who gets, the top of the page versus the bottom, and et cetera. And now the system is, the layout of that, the selection of content is really driven by content management and personalization, which behind the scenes to that is really AI, a kind of a nascent form of AI that is able to make sense out of browsing habits, both collectively, the number of people use the page, the site, and yourself, if you have a history with them. And that's a new design challenge. So that's on the end user side of things. We have plenty of customers asking for that. And sometimes they don't even say it's about AI. It's just they have a new use case because of AI. More interesting, though, to us is related to a product like Cortex, which is making AIs is an engineering task. And it's a particularly complicated engineering task because it's not just a task executed by engineers on, kind of commoditized data or commoditized logic. It is for the whole organization a new way of acting and thinking. And so they need development tools that are not just for the engineers, but employ the people who understand the data and understand the rules, like what is good behavior? When the AI is making decisions on the behalf of the user or against the user, is this ethical? Is this good business? And so you need interfaces that allow the engineers and the data scientists and the policy managers and the executives to participate, to see into the process, to audit the process, and to manage it and tune it over time. Because AI, unlike a lot of earlier kind of basic algorithms that we used in things like lists, can evolve. It can be trained to learn over time, and you get all kinds of situations like drift. And so the management becomes a new task. And so all of these things need interfaces, and that's super exciting. So we've been doing, to your question, we've been doing quite a few IDEs, supporting cognitive scale with IDEs. We helped a company that actually makes a little chip that goes inside of cameras. The chip can actually be used in all kinds of things, but cameras tends to be the market. And that chip will run against a model developed by a sample data set at a high performance, right? Low energy consumption, high
An inferencing chip.
MIP rate.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they take a an AI model, and a sample data set, and I don't know what you call it, rasterize it onto the chip, burn it onto the chip. You do a lot of optimization, and that needed an interface. So very different than cognitive scale, but still it was a beautiful opportunity to design an interface that simplified the tasks. And for that one, it was really not even about engineers. It was about getting people who were not engineers, but data scientists doing, let's say, research, to be able to use this without learning how to program. So super fun challenge. And lastly, it's not necessarily design, but we've been participating as kind of thought leadership with an organization called RAI, or RAY, which is the Responsible AI Institute. And it's just really exciting to participate in the sort of the thought process of how do you guide and develop AI inside of companies such that we don't end up with some huge ethical calamity where the public rejects it and the government starts stepping all over the freedom to create using this tool set. And the public does not trust AI. So it's a great subject to spend some time on.
Oh, I'm familiar with RAI because I was there in the early days at AI Global before it became RAI, right? So,
Yes. Used to be called AI Global, but it's a worthwhile cause. When you think about like green building, to me, is the analogy, like the LEED standards. This is the software version of that, and it's a good thing.
No. So one question I do have, when you're actually designing for, like, AI is still honestly in its infancy in being as pervasive as everybody talks about that it could be, right? But it's propping up everywhere, and so that brings in, as you said, design challenges and interfaces. How do you interact with AI? How do you build AI, and so forth? On the building side, those examples you gave, like either at cognitive scale or the chip company and so forth, there's a lot of AI is one of those team sports where you require all of these different people from different backgrounds to collaborate and build something together, right? Do you make
Yeah.
assumptions on the design process there and saying, hey, let's assume that this person is going to be the lead for this particular activity by subject matter expertise? Or do you focus on building an interface that is just brimming with all kinds of collaboration? Or is it a mix of the two?
Maybe it's a boring answer, but it's kind of a mix of the two. There's a lot of just experimentation because there's not a lot of precedent, which is fun, but sometimes precedent's pretty handy to lean on, because then you're building something against the precedent, right? Oh, they did it this way in the past, and that sucks, and let's them fix that. There's nothing to compare to so much, or very little to compare to, and so we're having to just try out a lot of stuff. And part of that is figuring out who's involved, who's going to use this. And so there's a lot of kind of making up and defining roles. The roles exist on the human scale inside of companies, but they're not very consistent from company to company. And so there's not a model to work from. There is just samples to work from. And then in coming up with the interface itself that will address these roles, we're having to make up constructs, because the technical end of AI is in a lot of ways a cooked soup to the engineers. There's a lot of technical ideas that if you stop and really spend some time with people like Matt Sanchez from Cognitive Scale, it's just brilliant. You can get a sense of how he thinks about the system, but otherwise it kind of feels and acts like a soup. And so we have to invent and make up much more human scale constructs, like the idea of a campaign. You want to look at a set of behavior from a set of people and come up with conclusions about that and take actions on that behavior in order to steer it towards better outcomes. What is that? That we can call that something. Let's call that a campaign, which matches the sort of human idea of a campaign when we think about politics or advertising. You take a cohort of people and you push an idea to change behavior. So there's a technical notion of a campaign, and we can use other notions like missions or goals and actions, and those things become hardened as technical constructs. And maybe 10 years from now, that'll be sort of a common idea. Like folder is in software user interface for desktops, or swipe is for mobile applications. These sort of things right now we're just sort of making them up as we go, and they will eventually harden. And that's super fun, but it's also a lot of trial and error, you might say. We're going to see, like with Cortex 5, we learned some things. Cortex 6, we're going to learn some more.
No, it's awesome, Mark. And the beauty of this is AI, or machine learning in general, itself is an experimental science, right? I mean, there's no such thing as saying, here's an ML product, and you don't look at it anymore again, right? It is an ever evolving, almost a living organism, right? Piece of software. And I think it requires these newer constructs to really adapt it to human scale. As I really like how the way you said it, right? It's about adapting it to human scale, because when you get to a level of maturity and AGI is everywhere and you have contextual machines sitting and running around, they probably don't need that interface, but you have to create that window right now for the interaction to happen. Beautiful.
Absolutely.
Tell me, one of the things in COVID-19. So last year was, pretty disastrous in a lot of ways, and
shit show.
It was a shit show, right? And I'm hoping the Delta variant doesn't cause as bad a havoc, right?
Shit show part 2.
So shit show part 1 and part 2, right? But there are some things that are never gonna go back to doing the same way as it was before. It's changing the human condition as we know it. It's been.
Oh, I don't know about that. I think we're going to add to the toolbox, but I'm not sure the never go back is a bit risky to say.
So tell me some things that, in this interaction, when we are interacting as human beings with technology, right? What are some things that you've noticed that I know you're a very keen observer and you've come up with all these, really, out there concepts, and then you kind of put it back and draw the dots to what you see today to make it happen, right? Tell me some examples of some things you've
Yeah, it's fun
noticed.
to
Yeah.
do. Well, take the simple historical analogy of holding a cell phone up to your head. 1989, if you did that, people, first of all, they look at you funny because it's surprising to see, but also it had this serious connotation of, are you so into yourself that you need to take a phone call right now? Are you so important? It was really kind of just surprising to see and really a turnoff for most people. Now, of course, we've crossed
Yep.
that bridge. Video conference, I think COVID helped us shove us across the bridge. We're all just jumping on video for any old reason. And collaboration tools have followed suit. So using things like virtual boards, Miro boards as an example, is now a common collaborative toolbox. We had a couple of nascent collaborative software suites. Some people are using Google's Docs, and suddenly that became incredibly common for even the most simple things. And now in the design field, we're collaboratively rendering interfaces. And so the idea that everything exists in a collaborative state, I think COVID was just a deep, deep accelerant to. There's a lot of discussion right now about the metaverse. I find it interesting because it's in a lot of ways being described like if someone were to describe the internet during the reign of AOL.
Mm.
It sounds a lot like just AOL in three-dimensional space. And I think it's the wrong idea. To wit, I have a concept that Jared Ficklin, one of the partners at work, we share the idea as essentially an answer about where digital is taking us. And we call it the meta me, which is rather than thinking of these places, we look at the self and the modulation of the self. AI, at some point, as an example, as do many of these other services and interfaces, become so intimate to us that we don't think of it as another hammer, right? A hammer is clearly a tool that makes us greater than our natural physical state, right? I can push metal things into wood, which I couldn't do with my hands. It hurt a lot. So a hammer is an extension of the body, but we still understand the hammer deeply as an extension, just a tool I can pick up and put down. It's not us, it's a hammer. But these tools that we use, things like searching, finding, knowing through digital conduits, and AI, of course, helping us know just in time, just about anything, are crossing this threshold from being understood as an external tool, like, oh, let me Google that, to a sense that that's actually us. And this takes a lot of time to explain, so you just have to trust me with the basic premise. But to me, that's the most interesting idea that AI is impacting, is that it's really affecting the way we understand ourselves. And so the term meta-me is to say the future self, which is emergent right now. This is not some wait for this to happen like virtual reality or mixed reality, augmented reality. This is a phenomenon now. Our perception of ourselves is really both analog and digital. And we are essentially an inseparable being at this point. And the future pushes that to some really crazy ends, where the idea of who we are, what we're able to do, what we know, how we interact with others, and how we're known is forever entwined with digital. And you do get some crazy possible outcomes, like the fact that I might have a avatar using AI that knows me well enough because it's participating in my, this call right now. Let's say it's scribing everything I say, and it's going into the general knowledge base of how I talk. And now I can send it off to have a conversation with someone else. And maybe that's a pretty tough task, So that's going to take a while, but I might send it to have some really low level conversations with people. Like I'm trying to sell a car right now. And so I'm getting all kinds of emails like, hey, do you still have it? I might just assign my AI to take care of that and sell the car for me. I might need to walk out and take the cash, but it's going to do everything else. That's me. That's my head, just a digital expression of it, doing the work. It's not another tool. Right now, we still have some lines where we think, oh, can I use this tool or that tool? But we're quickly crossing that. And that to me is actually the most insane thing to think about and really start to take
Yeah.
apart and think about what are the deeper implications.
It's interesting, and let me before I try to break it down. One thing, like your whole idea of digital avatars and pseudonymity is an emerging science right now on the crypto world, right? Wherein when you really bring in a trustless relationship building that could be possible using incentive networks like crypto, then you need another side of it, which is how do I remain pseudonymous, right? If you will, I can use different avatars to do different things. But to your point, I think there's something deep here which you're talking about in this concept of meta meme. Today, we are very well aware that if there is a system that actually takes off some cognitive load off you and performs a function, helps you make decision, you see it as a distinct extension of you, not you in itself.
Yep. Yeah, Facebook.
Right.
What is Facebook but an extension of yourself?
And you're saying what this will evolve to is we'll be so getting used to these little modules doing things with us, and it'll get to know us so well that our trust relationship with the systems will go a lot deeper. That'll let us really kind of be, in not philosophically, but we really expand our consciousness to improve or add these little units of non-living intelligence to be an extension of us. Am I?
You start losing sight of the line.
Yeah.
We have lost sight of the line of where we're able to go because of the common idea of wearing clothes. We can go into the cold and we don't think of it as a special thing. We can walk on gravel. We don't think of that as a special thing because clothes are just us. They're an extension of us and they're intimately part of us. And, it's probably not as interesting to talk about that because it's just clothes. But when you're talking about the mind and how the mind perceives itself, then it starts to get really interesting. And I do think we are crossing this line where it's hard for us to distinguish it. What's troubling about this vector is that we don't own those properties. Facebook is not generating that extension of our mind in our interest. They're doing it in their interest, right? But having a system like that in our interest is ideally the future. That is the future we would trust, ideally, and employ to do more intimate things, right? If a system learns more and more about me, not in order to sell me more shit, which,
Sure.
Facebook is a giant engine just to sell me more shit. It's willing to try and help us overthrow the government to sell more shit. I mean, when you really trace back, the reason things get pushed to you is because advertising works better when that happens, et cetera, et cetera. If we can find an engine and develop properties that are in our interest, you could employ that same knowledge set towards maybe buying less, or buying exactly the right thing, finding exactly the right job, taking care of your body, in health terms in exactly the right way. These are the systems. Once we get over this awful initial trend of buying more shit through, the power of this second brain, we have so many amazing things that can happen. We're just, all this energy is really going towards better shopping at the moment. I mean, that is largely outside of security, you could call the biggest investor of AI, easily, I suppose this is an easy statistic, is just shopping. But when we think about what it should be doing, there's so many cool things.
Yeah.
Healthcare, of course,
The,
being
the incentives
a big
aren't
one.
aligned to do the right thing for the sovereign individual, right? And
No, no, uh, uh, no, they're not. That's too long of a
no, it's
conversation.
awesome. So I don't want to go to from here to the question that says what's broken in AI that needs to be fixed, but because you just nailed it. But bring that to the now today, right? So one is this whole incentive structure,
Yeah.
governance, if you will. But what else is broken? I mean, is it the power with a few resourceful big organization, the dynamic? Of,
Oh, yes, we had, so you have a few things. Just like transportation in the early 20th century, you have a real um, amassing of power by very few people. So that has to change, either naturally or we need to force it to happen. It's just unhealthy, no matter how much they cry, how unfair it is. It's just unhealthy for society. So that has to change. We can't see into AI. And so when you have these companies who are not necessarily using it in the right way, we neither can tell when it's being used, nor can the companies who would like to manage it really understand. I mean, hell, we get past the even bad intents or bad management. The companies who want to do the right thing still don't have the tools to know how the system's running. So it's a
yep.
black box, right? That's the short form of the answer. And so we need tools to illuminate what's going on. And those tools need to have a consumer face. Like, here is the logic for why you're getting a recommendation. So if I get a recommendation for a pair of shoes or a recommendation for a medical treatment, I need to be able to press another button to say, where'd you get that idea? And that needs to be delivered in a way that I can understand it. When I pick up a can of soup and I turn it around, I can understand what went into that, even though it's a black box, right? It's a sealed metal container of something someone else made. And for years, early on, companies would poison people on accident or out of just a disregard. And we had to create an organization to monitor that. And we had to create standards for packaging to make it understandable for people who are either had allergies or were just concerned about their salt intake. And now we have something that's reasonably trustworthy. We need similar kind of reality built up around AI and, in a lot of ways, software in general, as it gets more intimate to how we
Yep.
live. I think that intimacy is a key word, right? We depend on it. It's not just a luxury. Like Facebook is still maybe a luxury, but as it finds its way into things, as Google becomes critical, a lot of these tools become critical just to live in the modern context. You can still go live in a shed, but if you don't want to do that and you want to live in the modern context, these tools are necessary. And therefore, like a can of soup, we need to know what's going into them.
Interesting. What is one call for action for innovators in AI that you would like to make? What should they focus on solving today?
We just need more models for representing AI, right? So we're coming up with constructs given the work we're doing. We need others doing that, and we need more people who can speak more fluently about the systems, and therefore, of those people, you can start to impose or inject some smarter thinking. I mean, it's we need more people who aren't just the developers or just the business people who want that initial outcome. We need more people who have a concern over the human side of the equation, have a concern over the ethical side of the equation, have a concern over a sustainable future for this, right? There's a lot of let's just build it now and we'll see what happens. There's a lot of that going on. And like most
Yep.
industries, look, I'm not only single out AI. Most industries, when they're born, are just total
Yep.
cowboy, right? This is automotives. We killed a lot of people with dangerous cars. We killed a lot of people with roads that had no signage. We we killed a lot of people with poisoned food, and with bad healthcare methodology. All of these fields grew up as it became more important to the world and more people participated in it. We just need the same thing here. It's reality.
Awesome.
It's not
Awesome.
in that.
Got it. Now, and I have two more questions for you. We're running out of time. Standard questions I ask all my guests. AGI, artificial general intelligence. You talked about the positive side of it, which is the meta-me. Do you worry about artificial general intelligence? What about it worries you? If you do.
I'm not afraid of it at all theoretically, like most scientists. I just don't believe it's that attainable. But there is a funny statement. I forgot who said it, but intelligence is as intelligence does. And that's a more telling way of looking at it. I do believe we will come to perceive a lot of systems as reasonably intelligent. They'll be like squirrels, super, super good at doing the one thing they do, but will be likely the only lens we even consider them. The idea of a robot walking around having general conversations and being able to help you fix your car or, help you diagnose a medical condition. Not worried about that at all. That's just economically not interesting. People don't want to make those kind of things and people don't want to buy those kind of things. They buy wrenches for their car and they buy, like a blood glucose monitor for their body. We have specialization in invention, and the same thing will happen around intelligence. So general intelligence isn't, I think, even that terribly desirable. So I'm not even worried about it happening for that reason.
Got it. One personal question. What is one personal practice that you employ to remain on top of your game?
Just trying to stay busy doing that work. I mean, Argo does a lot of different work. We worked on a shopping cart recently.
A shopping cart.
That's really distant from AI. It's a design task. We try to make a really cool shopping cart. But we seek out the kind of work that represents the future we're concerned for, that we'd like to participate in, that we'd like to see work out. So we look for that work and we lean into it. We put our skills where it is and we look for the clients who want to do interesting things. So that's the practice to me that makes a difference.
Awesome. Awesome. Mark, where can the viewers and listeners get in touch with you?
Mark.Rolston, ROLSTON, at argodesign.com. Awesome. I'm not much for social media, so I'm not tweeting.
Okay. All right, Mark. Thanks.
If you tweet at me, I might see it, but I don't tweet back. Okay. I think it's a shit show.
Talking about shit show.
So anyway, sorry, you didn't ask me that question.
But hey, we have the current state of a lot of shit shows going on, starting with COVID to Twitter to COVID, Delta variant and so forth. But the future is so bright with a meta-me, where you have the human condition and the human experience expanded by intelligent systems. So I think we'll be good. We just have to get through this path and we'll get to the future that we want to shape for ourselves.
We will. I do have a bright picture of the future, but we go through phases that don't always look so bright.
I agree.
We're in there.
Mark, this was fascinating. Thank you so much for taking the time. It was awesome.
Thank you. Good to talk to you.
All right.